Hello, it's Silver, and this is SpellForce, Conquest of Eo. So this is actually a 4X strategy with some tactical turn-based combat in it, which means it's a lot different than the traditional SpellForce series, and that's because this is actually not supposed to be SpellForce 4. This is actually a spin-off created by a different developer in the same universe. It is a sort of smaller side project that is less expensive on launch than a typical SpellForce game, and is meant to be a sort of companion spin-off to the main series. The fact that it's a 4X with a focus on tactical, like hex-based combat basically means it plays much closer to something like Age of Wonders or Master of Magic, maybe a little bit of Heroes of Might and Magic, something like that. And the way that it works, to start with, is you have to create your mage. Now, your mage is not a unit on the battlefield, and instead is you, the sort of unseen hand that controls everything. And you have 3 different choices of different types of mage to create. You can also choose a 4th custom choice to sort of make your own, which is pretty cool. But the 3 main choices are a big deal because these will determine all of the main mechanics that you'll be using, as well as how you bolster your forces and what your armies are composed of and things. So you can choose between an alchemist, which creates lots of potions and bombs and the like, and has a lot of item-using units and stuff. You can also choose an artificer, which revolves around crafting artifacts and stuff for your hero units and things like that. And you can choose a necromancer, which is what I chose, which takes souls to craft some undead units to bolster your armies with some more powerful and sometimes very high-tier units that you can actually create yourself. And once you complete the creation of your mage, you'll be plopped into the map around a tower, and this tower is your home base. This is where everything is based out of. When you recruit units, they come from the tower. When you create necromancer minions, they spawn at the tower. Everything that you do is based around this very important building, and in fact, you have to protect it at all costs because it can be raided by enemies, and if this happens too much, you can actually straight up lose the game. When you start, your tower will have a small domain around it that takes up several hexes in the general vicinity, and everything within that domain generates some resources for you, from gold income to mana crystals to whatever else is actually in the area. But this stuff tends to be depleted after a while. The resources around your tower usually aren't infinite, which means eventually you're going to have to actually move your tower, and yes, you can actually move it. There's a spell that you can learn eventually that will allow you to actually rip it up from the ground and fly it around the map and then plop it down somewhere else. You'll also immediately notice how the army system works. You have stacks of units, and by default, your armies can consist of 4 stacks of units in one group. You have 4 slots. And there's also a 5th slot, aside from that can't be used with normal units and is instead reserved for hero units and apprentices. But as you advance through the game and get more and more powerful, you'll eventually be able to expand the number of slots that each of your armies can actually consist of, so you can have 6 or 7 slot armies as you continue going on, and of course bolstering them with a hero unit does drastically improve their survivability. You also have a research and a spell system that will be very familiar to you if you've played something like Age of Wonders before. It's all centered around your grimoire, this magical book that expands as you explore the world and gain more power and things. And you just simply click on any research that you want, and it will start contributing all of your earned research points to researching that particular technology. Usually, in this case, technology means spell, some sort of spell for you to cast or some sort of improvement for your tower or your armies. And each of the 3 mage types that you can choose has a different variety of spell pages in their grimoire that will allow them to do various things. Like, for instance, since I'm a necromancer, I have a lot of spells involving the extraction of souls to create more minions, a lot of debuffs and like disease spreading stuff like the plague spell and some other things like that. Once you have a spell research, it then becomes permanently available in your spellbook, and you can just choose to cast it whenever you want. And you will be generating a selection of mana crystals every turn, although different types of minions, the more fantastical magical minions, do actually have a magical upkeep cost that will reduce the number of mana crystals you're generating per turn, so you've got to make sure to not have a deficit, because if you completely run out, then you're not able to pay these perpetuation costs. The minions will actually leave your service. Any enchantments you have that cost an upkeep will also stop working and things like that, so you got to make sure to be careful about how much mana you're spending per turn. You also have a mastery rank, which is important because this is how you advance in power in general, but also the mastery rank determines how much mana you can invest in a spell per turn. So if you're at mastery rank 10 and you're casting a spell that costs 20 mana, then it's always going to cost at least 2 turns to cast that spell, even if you already have enough mana to cast it all at once, because you can only invest 10 per turn. And all of this is centered around the pretty interesting mechanic of the all-fire nodes. So as you're exploring, you'll find these little Triforce-looking symbols on the map that are all-fire nodes, and this all-fire stuff is what you need to actually gain more power. And what you actually have to do is cast a spell to summon a Wisp, and the Wisp is actually a relatively good support unit in combat, but its main function is to scout and to meld with these all-fire nodes. You just have to fly it to one of these nodes that is currently undefended, and then click the meld button, and it will take about 2 turns in order to actually take it over. And once you've melded with a node, it will expand a little bit of your domain around it, as well as give you that all-fire generation per turn. And you have this big triangular menu that you can go to called the all-fire flow menu to determine where all of those resources are actually going each turn. You can split it between research points, mana crystal generation, and mastery point gain. So if you've got, say, 8 all-fire flow, you might dedicate 4 of it to generating some mana, 2 of it to research, and 2 of it to mastery. You can do whatever combination that you want. And mastery increases your mastery level, which by itself doesn't do anything at first, but once you reach certain thresholds, will upgrade your mage level to a new named tier. And as you do this, this is how you gain a bigger domain around your tower, as well as access to more slots for your armies, as well as more apprentice slots. So the whole apprentice system is also pretty cool. As you advance your mage, you will gain these slots to hire apprentices, and somewhere in different spots around the world as you explore, you'll find these arcane academies. And whenever you go to one, you will get a choice between 2 different apprentices, only one of which you can actually hire from each of these academies. The academies have a specific theme, and the apprentices in that academy will have certain passive effects as to what type of mage they are based on that theme. And once you hire one of the 2, that academy will disappear off of the map entirely. You can then place your apprentices in that extra slot next to the other army slots, and they can drastically increase the power of your troops. They tend to have a variety of spells and abilities and all sorts of passives and stuff available to them at any given time. They can also be equipped with runes. All of your units can be equipped with runes that adds different passive effects, as well as the fact that apprentices and heroes can be equipped with equipment, like actual artifacts that will alter their stats, sometimes give them new abilities and some other stuff like that. They tend to be quite powerful, but are somewhat hard to find at first. You're going to have to find like old battlegrounds and ancient ruins and stuff, usually, that are very well defended, in order to find a lot of these artifacts. Another thing that apprentices can do is place down a lodge wherever they want, and this will take a couple of turns to build, but once it's built, it will expand your domain to that area, giving you a sort of island of influence somewhere that allows you to expand the amount of resources you're gaining per turn by placing this lodge around some really nice resource nodes. It also acts as a safe place for that particular apprentice to return to whenever they need to heal up, and it's also where they will regenerate if they're killed. If an apprentice is killed in combat, they will respawn in about a week's time at their own lodge. However, enemies can attack this lodge and destroy it if you don't defend it well enough, and if an apprentice has no lodge, well, that means they're completely dead, and the only way to revive them then is to use the Revive Hero spell, which is an extremely expensive spell that takes a long time to research, like 40 plus turns, but once it's cast, you can indeed bring them actually back from the dead with all of their levels intact. You'll also find some hero units occasionally, and these work in a similar way but with some differences. They still have the ability to equip artifacts. They are put in that extra slot in your army just like apprentices are, and they're very powerful units. However, they can't build lodges, which means if they're killed, the only way to bring them back is to use that super expensive revival spell. But they also gain a page in your grimoire that allows you to sort of advance their story by completing specific objectives and thus making them stronger. So that's how pretty much all the stuff works on the main map. You have all sorts of different resources to find, different types of gathering nodes to find, and many armies of various enemy factions to come across, as well as other factions that you can actually improve your relations with and not necessarily be enemies with. There are also various cities that you'll find that are pretty important, because the cities have a realm of influence around them, and as you clear that realm of influence out, you can actually improve your standing in the city, because you're, killing beasts and bandits and stuff for them. You can also go into the cities and accept side quests that will allow you to go to various more difficult combats and other sort of fetch quests and some stuff like that in order to improve your standing even further. And as your standing improves in each individual city, you will gain access to more of their facilities, allowing you to hire higher tier units at them. So you can bolster your armies with some better units that you can actually purchase from cities. And in fact, this is probably the earliest way you're going to find like tier 2+ units, is by just going to these cities, exploring them a bit, and improving your standing with them so that you can actually hire better units from them. There are also circle mages around the place, which are your enemies. They start out accepting you, just basic acceptance. They're not going to help you, but they also aren't going to go out of their way to come after you. However, as you explore and find more of them, you'll find that as the days advance, they start to just naturally dislike you more and more, until eventually they'll all start to actually wage war against you. And they're going to be your main antagonists for your campaign because they are very powerful. They're placed in different spots around the world with a lot of their armies bolstering their realms, and you're going to need to eventually come up against them and start beating back their territories if you want to survive. Now, combat is, like I mentioned, a tactical hex-based, turn-based affair, so very much like Age of Wonders. You just run into any enemy group on the main map and you will be put into a combat map, and there's actually a lot of variety in the combat maps, which I definitely like, and there's a lot of detail in them too. Like, you might go to one of the undead realms and see like some ghost cows grazing on the side of the battlefield and stuff like that. There's just a lot of little cute details like that that make them feel very alive and nice to look at. But each of the units, of course, has its own movement speed and its own number of tiles that it can actually move per turn. You have a 3 action point based system, but interestingly, you can only use 2 of the action points for movement. So that means even at max movement distance, you'll still have 1 action point left. And the way that the whole action point investment thing works is once you do anything else, it will use all of your available action points to repeat that action as many times as you can. So if you move 2 action points worth and then attack, you'll attack once. But if you're already next to an enemy at the start of your turn and attack, you'll attack 3 times and consume all of the points. So this means that melee units in this game are very strong because once they move in, they get a lot of attacks per turn, whereas ranged units can also become a real problem depending on their overall damage output, because they can actually send up to 3 volleys per turn out at a specific unit, but you can't change targets mid-attack. You can only attack 3 times on 1 actual stack of units. And of course, there will be all kinds of extra spells and special abilities and things that different units have that they can use. Oftentimes there's an actual resource, a sort of mana-like resource that a lot of units will have, that they can pull from as a pool that will regenerate after battle. So you have to be careful about how much you use it in that particular battle, since there's no way to really get it back most of the time until you actually win and move on. There's also the whole crafting or spell casting idea that's different for each type of mage. And in my case as a necromancer, you get this soul interface where you can plop in a soul, which you usually get from killing enemies, although there are some other ways to find them as well. And then you have various ingredient slots, and these ingredients have different types of essences in them, colored for stuff like life and death essence or arcane essence and things like that. And you can put a different number of the different essences within this soul interface, and it will create different types of undead. So if you have a tier 1 soul and you put in like no real essence, you just cancel out the life and make sure it's just a basic normal soul, you will create simple ghouls. But if you have like a tier 2 soul and you put 6 of the orange essences in, you can get skeleton riders, which are a mounted skeleton melee unit. You can find tons and tons of different ingredients throughout the world by harvesting them from actual harvestable nodes like mining points and wheat and fields of other herbs and things like that. You can also find them, of course, from actually doing battle. You'll especially get lots of remains and pieces of monsters and stuff. You can find various treasure and food caches throughout the world that you can actually just run up to and claim, as long as they're not defended by someone angry. And you'll also be able to buy some of this stuff from the market. And each of these ingredients has at least 1 essence that it has in it. Some of them have a bunch of multiple essences, some of them have a ton of just one singular kind. It depends on the overall rarity and tier of the ingredient, exactly what it has. And each of the 3 mage types, alchemists, artificers, and necromancers, use these essence-based ingredient systems in order to actually work their specific kind of magic. So depending on which of the 3 sorts of mages you chose, you're going to be using a combination of your spell grimoire and this ingredient-based crafting system to actually make your armies, buff and debuff things, and all that sort of stuff, and actually determine how effective you are. And a lot of this effectiveness comes down to tier. There is a pretty vast gulf of difference between tier 2 and tier 3 units, you'll find, and I actually find this game to be really, really difficult. Now, I'm not the person to come to in terms of like trying to figure out how fair or difficult a 4X strategy game is, because these aren't really my specialty. I like them and I've played them on and off for years, but I'm more of a casual fan. I'm not someone that's ever tried to get really, really good at any of them. But even having said that, I gotta admit, I think this game is actually pretty difficult, mostly because of that huge gulf in power between tier 2 and above units, and the fact that the world will leave you behind if you're not fast enough. All of these circle mages, as well as all of the various beast factions and stuff, their units will get stronger. They'll get battle experience, and they'll gain in tier to the point where you might come across a bridge that's defended by a couple of soldiers early on in the game and then not be able to beat them. You then ignore it for a while, come back, and now it's defended by much higher tier units and a larger army in general, and that can happen all over the world. So if you're not quick enough with upgrading your units and getting a hold of more powerful ingredients to make more powerful effects and things, then you're actually going to get left behind pretty fast, because the mages and the other enemies will have tier 3 plus units before long, and if you don't have units of that sort of higher capacity, then you're not going to be able to beat them in battle. But to help you along with all of your advancement, there's a ton of side quests and other main quest branches that you'll find that allow you to, you know, explore the world and get new units and advance your mastery level and all that stuff. You'll find all sorts of just random events that happen that give you some choices between different options that can ingratiate you with different factions or not, depending on what you choose. A lot of cities not only have various side quests for you to actually accept when you get there, but many of them will have various different markers on the map with different names that will basically be little side stories that you can optionally progress through if you want. Some of these will end in combat, some of them will end in resource distribution or other things like that, but oftentimes they'll give you not only extra reputation with nearby cities, but also some rarer ingredients and reagents and stuff to use in your various experiments. You'll also find that your grimoire will open up occasionally with some new objectives that are often placed all around the map, from difficult battles guarding special crystals to other lost pages for you to find and things like that. And as you complete these objectives, you'll gain power, get new spells and new pages available in your book to unlock more stuff and more research and all kinds of stuff. So that means there's a lot of progression on the map in this game, just a ton of stuff for you to find and do. Overall, it's a really solid 4X that's only $30, which for this genre is not that bad, and the amount of content on offer here is pretty good in my opinion, with 3 completely different playstyles to try, and a lot of different units and stuff to find, and a lot of experimenting to do with the various reagents to see what other kinds of stuff you can unlock. There's like over 100 spells, I think. There's a lot here for that price. This is a very combat-focused 4X, though, so if you're getting into this expecting something with, like, the diplomacy depth of Civilization or something like that, that's not what this is about. This is a very combat-focused game, but at least it has a really fun combat system in order to actually make that work. As far as bugs or anything, there is one that I have to talk about because I've encountered it 3 separate times and it's kind of an issue. Occasionally, the game will pop up a window that cannot be interacted with. It doesn't freeze the game, but it prevents you from doing anything else, so you have to Alt F4 the game and reload when this happens. I found that it usually happens after a battle when the results screen is supposed to pop up. Sometimes it just pops up this blank screen with nothing on it, and it completely prevents you from doing anything. You can't click anything, you can't open any other menus to back out or anything, you've just got to Alt F4. I don't know what's up with this. Like I said, it's happened to me 3 separate times, so in the amount of hours I've played, that's not that bad, but still, that's 3 times that shouldn't happen, so hopefully that gets fixed soon, because I don't think I'm the only one that's experienced this sort of blank window bug. Hopefully it's something that they are made aware of and are working on a fix for. So overall, yeah, I definitely do recommend SpellForce Conquest of Eo, despite the occasional bit of bugginess that needs to be solved. It's a really solid, fantasy, combat-focused 4X that does a good job of having a lot of variety in its content to justify its price. So I will put the link to the Steam store page in the description below this video, so you guys should check out yourself if you'd like. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.